Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Charles Freeze. I'm the commander of the 850th Spectrum Warfare Group, Det 1, also known as Wavelength. And I'd like to welcome you guys to the second of our learning series. This week, we're going to have, going forward, today our lecturer is Tori. She is the Chief Growth Officer for Sagely. In this role, she focuses on expanding Sagely's business, client success, and internal company development. Before coming to Sagely, Tori served as the Senior Advisor on Agile Acquisitions to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. Prior to her SES level advisory role, Tori led the Agile Acquisition team as the Chief Business Officer, where she helped build the U.S. Air Force's Kessel Run software factory. There, she pioneered an innovative way to approach acquisitions policy to enable the continuous delivery of software to classified networks for the first time in Air Force history. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tori Cuff.
Thank you, sir, and thank you so much for those kind words. All right, a bit of an echo, but I think we're good now. So I'm very excited to speak to you all today. And so the title of the talk, just diving in, is Intro to Digital Organizations. But we could replace the word digital with innovative, dominant, or even scrappy. And so what we're doing through this series is building on concepts. And 2 weeks ago, Adam Furtado talked about the imperative of a learning organization. This now is taking a different lens as far as the focus of how businesses are continually able to navigate the often unpredictable change. So what you can expect from today, we're going to focus on this lecture first. We'll continue to provide all of our resources. There will be a short Q&A, but this week there's going to be a workshop that's going to apply some of the tactics that we discuss. The learning goals throughout the entire week is not only from an understanding level, but to make sure that we're providing you tools and tactics to in your own role or team and context. So diving right in and taking from the government, let's start with the bottom line up front, or BLUF. The differentiators in digital organizations are first, agility vice agile, over communicate and deliberate collaboration, and foster a learning ecosystem. So you may be asking why only 3. So we're starting with the agile concepts of start small and iterate and continue to improve. So that's why we prioritized 3 differentiators to discuss today. The second thing you might be starting to think is these aren't groundbreaking and not surprising. I'd agree with you. The difference here is not that these are new concepts, but rather the successful implementation that organizations are able to do time and time again. Specifically across a large organization, this gets a lot more difficult to navigate. And speaking of large organizations, the DoD is the largest US employer. I once heard it described as 5 companies, we could now say 6 with the Space Force, that are working together to support a single mission. And so looking at it from that angle and starting with the top strategy document that is within the DoD, we have the National Defense Strategy. I really like this document for a few reasons. It provides that critical strategic alignment for all services and anyone supporting the DoD mission. It provides insight into priorities from the view of our current leaders. It's a long-term view. This isn't updated annually, typically every 4 to 8 years, often tying with administrations. And then the last thing is it's not too long. It's only 23 pages, so it's quite manageable. But from our perspective, we're talking about digital today. So starting to key in on what is the guidance and strategy for our technology and and what to invest in there. And this is where actually before it articulates the specific investments, the section header says make the right investments, where it goes on to detail that we will be fast followers where the market force is driving. And fast followers is synonymous with adoption. And we could also just replace that phrase of the competitive edge no longer goes to the entity that can develop fastest. It's the one that can either develop or maybe even more importantly, quickly integrate and adopt to meet mission need. So if we start now trying to dive in again to what are the technical advancements, that's when we turn to under the Secretary of Defense, we have the Office of Research and Engineering, which was the counterpart to the organization I used to support, which was Acquisition Sustainment. And Research and Engineering is really trying to, they set our priorities. They tell the department what are the critical technologies that we are supposed to be investing in. And very nicely, it's in both the National Defense Strategy, but also you can Google these as the critical technology areas set by Research and Engineering are these 14. And tying back to this idea of quickly or fast followers, this is more imperative because only 3, so 79% are being led by industry because 3 of these are defense-led, which are the bottom ones that are highlighted. So this really emphasizes this criticality of a DoD and industry partnership to not only access talent, to extend the mission, have that alignment that's so critical. And then finally, our #1 strategy that is in the National Defense Act, National Defense Strategy, support deterrence. So clear that we need industry, but just as we took a larger step back as far as what is the DoD strategy and how are we going to navigate, I think there's and when we say digital, what did that impact to industry? How did that evolve over time? And I think looking at these larger views is always a nice way to kind of ground, and then we can really dive into the tactics. So bear with me. We'll quickly go through this evolution, and we'll nicely use an example of General Electric. So General Electric, 1896, the Dow, which is a proxy for health in the US economy and provides insight into the 30 largest US companies. When it was first established in 1896, there was 12, and GE was one of the 12. 108 years later, GE is still operating, thriving. Actually, it is now at the top of the list because by market capitalization, it is the #1. So this means that in the US, its total market value was the highest for the company's outstanding shares. So looking into 12 years later in 2016, GE is still remaining top 10, but we've dropped 26% in market capitalization. Just 2 years after that, it dropped 78% and is the last company that was on the original list that is finally removed from the Dow. So not to say that GE is not operating today. They still are. They are no longer, though, the giant that they once were. And GE is not alone here. I know that this is a busy chart, but what this is trying to show again is looking at this from the larger perspective. So this is approximately 100 years time, showing the fluctuations that the Dow has been encountering and when companies are joining and being removed. And so on the top right, on the right-hand side here, you start to see a lot more movement, and that's what the data shows. In the past 40 years is where we see 63% of the change. And so we talk a lot about technology disrupting and the impacts, and this is just looking at it from a company perspective of these advancements in all of the everything that is going on is having impacts not only from we now have smartphones in our pockets, but it's changing the name of who are the top companies in the US. So one last way to look at this is from the world view. And so when we look at top companies per market capitalization, this is as of yesterday, the top 10. I'm going to take a slight deviation from the digital focus and tie it back to one of the strategies in the department writ large is to make sure that the US is at the top of these investments. 9 out of 10 of these companies are US companies, which is a wonderful thing to see, because we want to make investments to ensure the US economy is thriving and that we're remaining dominant in the marketplace. But as we've seen with a bunch of changes occurring, this list is volatile. Actually, it wasn't too long ago that China's Tencent, which is Alibaba's parent company, their version of, I'd say, Amazon, was in this top 10 list and has been since dropped. But focusing back to today, let's highlight that 50% are now IT and tech companies. You might notice that there's probably one outlier of Tesla when you look at Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, and Amazon, and that it wouldn't be too long ago that Tesla would have been referred to as an auto or car company. That's not wrong, but it's also following this trend that we're seeing throughout of by 2030, majority of the cost of your car is now software. And so it's thinking of, it doesn't matter what the hardware is, it's the software is the critical enabler, which is what all these points are getting at and what we're seeing, whether it's in sooner, safer, happier, or other expectations of growth and the foundation that software will be to business value. So I want to go back and look at this GE timeline real quick and overlay the software development and what was happening in the background. So obviously in 1896, we don't have to worry so much. That's not where software was. But by the 1970s, we're seeing a more prevalent adoption, but there's still big bang approach. It's costly in terms of time and money to deploy software. We roll around to 2000, and that's when the Agile Manifesto is published, and we start to see a huge increase in developers as far as what they're able to produce. But there's still this over the edge moment to operators that creates a lot of risk, and as this shows, often catastrophic outcomes. Finally, in 2009 is when the term DevOps is first coined, and this real focus on developers and IT operators working together. Couple that with the cloud, and now deployments are more routine, low risk, and we're really seeing the practices and concepts all throughout software methodology or modern software methodology being espoused and practiced. And to be clear, the point here is not to say that GE was fully disrupted because of this software evolution happening in the background, but I would say that we couldn't say that it's not part of the picture. The takeaway is understanding that what is going on from a technological and a process standpoint is so critical, and what the National Defense Strategy is directing us to do to make sure that we can quickly incorporate so that we can hit our goal of keeping that dominant or strategic advantage. So the tactical and diving into the trends and patterns of digital organizations and the differentiators. So we're back to that first slide of agility vice agile, over communicate and deliberate collaboration, and focus on a learning ecosystem. So up first is agility vice agile. And similarly, we could replace, this is an opportunity where we could replace the word agile with lean or DevOps, because those are not the goal, rather they're the tools that support the desired outcomes. So George Bush, he's linking at us because he's giving us a hint here, but what he's saying is what we just talked about, right? The market is getting disrupted, technology is advanced, and so to be in business tomorrow, we need to rethink of how we approach things and make sure that we are incorporating these changes that are happening. So what is agility? Starting with the definition, I think there's power in looking at both of them. Right? It's not about just moving fast. It's about this moving fast with thinking and understanding. So we want to learn, or what is now very prevalent in modern software, the feedback loop that is build, measure, learn. And what is so powerful here is for multiple reasons. One, you can think about this build, measure, learn feedback loop in terms of an organization, in terms of a team, or even in terms of yourself. And And it's not a software practice only. Again, there's a way that we can think about this feedback loop as this powerful tool to support whatever your context or your job. But let's give two sides of the coin here. So first, we'll talk with this typical software example of the first kind of step is to break down work into smaller chunks. And so then we start running through the build, measure, learn, where we are writing code. We're ensuring that we understand the intent behind the code and can test it with our users and the functionality, and using those opportunities to learn, either to improve what you just released or to incorporate it into your next feature or Epic, whatever software bundling of capability you would like to use. From an acquisition perspective, and thinking about this from what I've supported in the past of what are the big events. And so similarly, software used to be a very big event and big bang deployments. And that was what the Agile and DevOps and all these methodologies are trying to do, is like to cycle through this process faster so we can learn and iterate. And so similarly in acquisition, one of the big events is contracting across the DoD. So it's not just in terms of developing a contract, that's measured in years. It's in terms of awarding, again, another big event, and then finally executing a contract. So there's long timelines associated with a lot of the process. And so what we wanted to do was follow that same concept of break down work into smaller chunks, which would be worked with not only when Kessel Run, but organizations across the DoD to break down their work into those smaller contracts. We would then ensure to make sure that those were effective. One of the best practices I saw was an organization actually wrote contracting test scripts to write the intent behind what they were doing from a contract strategy. I say that because contracting and acquisition can be as much of a different language, in my opinion, as coding can be. So putting that in plain language, as far as this was before remote work became more prevalent. An example would be, we believe by allowing a vendor to work remotely, we'll get access to more talent. And there's ability to measure at 2 points there of, first, when you release and get proposals back, but second, when you the work begins. So again, making sure that you're being deliberate with the measurement and opportunities to learn, so then you can go back and improve. And those examples I think are powerful, but again, this isn't something that is different from what we said in the past. And that goes back to the idea of these aren't new concepts. It's just making sure we are applying them to meet the intent. Breaking down work in that way from an acquisition standpoint has been in contracting policy for years. And so again, it's just making sure we have the tools and that we are putting them in place across a team. And that's where it really lies into this idea of making sure we're nesting learning loops, and nesting them really particularly focused on the organization and team level. Organizations have a lot of teams, programs supporting them. So when they set a strategy, there's a longer feedback loop. And what is amazing about aligning and doing these nested learning loops is it allows the teams to also set them. That's in alignment with the organization, but the team learnings can actually be indicators to support the larger organization and to either iterate at that level or to share learnings across. So the tactics discussed here are experiment with feedback loops at all levels, and then create these nested feedback loops, particularly between the organization and the teams. There's a quick, we will be discussing, this is one of the activities we will go through on the Thursday workshop, but also this is really what is the Sagely Immersive Learning Lab that will give you more information on, is centered around, is how to apply these agility tactics across your job and have a toolbox here. All right, going back into the second differentiator is to over-communicate and deliberate collaboration. General Mattis is I really like his quotes. There's a bluntness and a straightforwardness to them, but it also, I think, is very resonating. So when you are working on a product or project, you work on that day in, day out, and you understand things very clearly. I think a mistake I've made, and again, he says a lot of people make, is that level of understanding is quickly interpreted either across teams or at the leadership level. Don't make that mistake. That's wrong. What you need to understand is, and he takes it from a sense of recognizance, but the time spent to ensure that there's understanding and to communicate either with leaders or your extended team is not wasted. Because first off, we'll show kind of the power behind it, but the power, one power is that it allows your message to carry more. The more people that understand what you are working on and the capability that you are trying to pull forward, the more people that can support it and ensure that it is executed. A way to think about this is hopefully going back in time a little bit here. A few of you played telephone as kids, as I did, when you sit in a circle and you're saying a phrase and seeing how if you're able to get it, if the same phrase is spoken all the way through. And I can't remember a single time that we were successful as kids. And turns out that's the expected result. So every time there's a trade-off of you are communicating information, 50% of that information is retained. That follows through 4 handoffs, we're down to 6%. So this is research from Mary and Tom that are lean software pioneers. I'm saying Mary and Tom because I will butcher their last name and we're clearly on first name basis. But the important thing here is how quickly the information is getting lost across the team when you try to communicate it multiple times. So the way that we can get around this is to over communicate. So communicate, communicate, communicate. Not only for retention, but the more you hear something, the more you like it. A great example of this is, that annoying song that you hear on the radio, or in my husband's case, the fact that I've been listening to Christmas music for the past month. So the first time he hears the Christmas playlist come on, he grumbles and does not want to listen to it. But over time, right, he is now singing it along to our 8-month-old. I like to say that he very much enjoys the Christmas music now, but there is studies to show that that annoying song, whether it be on, the radio or your Spotify playlist, does get catchy to you because the more you hear it, the more you like it. Minimize information silos and bubbles. This is very important. Again, going back to General Mattis's quote of your information, and the better we can share it across teams, the better the organization will operate. And the differentiator here is not just sharing information, but quickly and succinctly, which gives another example of a loop that we can use. So this came from Sooner, Safer, Happier. We can align, sense, respond, experiment, distill, and share. Distill is the really critical step that I think a lot of people miss. We want to make sure we're bringing down the level of information to the context that matters for sharing and for advocacy or understanding. All right, so going into the last differentiator that we're going to discuss today, which is foster a learning ecosystem. And so this is, I think, our biggest tool, that education and learning is, as Nelson Mandela puts it, the most powerful weapon. And it's our best case to continue to achieve the outcomes and goals that we're striving towards within the department and to achieve the National Defense Strategy. And now I shamelessly stole slides from Adam Furtado's talk 2 weeks ago for 2 reasons. I think there were good slides here. And I'm not just saying that because he's my boss, but also because of the idea of, again, communicate, 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 and there's consistency. That's nice. If you didn't have a chance to join that talk, it's included in the links at the end, but we'll briefly kind of overview these 4 characteristics again for the team. So learning at work. One of the big things here is that learning should be a part of the job. And it doesn't just benefit the individual. Learning at work benefits you as the person that just learned, the team that you're supporting, and then the corollary is the organization that you work for. Creating a climate for learning. This is where, again, I think the 350th is off to a wonderful start with what Colonel Kozlov has put in place of ensuring that there is a focus and a deliberate attention to creating that learning environment. Learning structure. This is really paying attention to people learn differently. There's a lot that goes into whether, information resounds as much, whether it is visual or reading. So making sure that you provide those different opportunities is very important to provide the maximum impact. And then finally, that organizational learning of making sure that sharing is happening or that communication is happening to ensure alignment. And that provides that critical foundation to moving fast. The more the team has an understanding of this larger direction, the more they can make the right decisions at the levels necessary, whether it be at a team or in an individual. There's a theme of all of these. We've kind of talked about the positive and negatives associated with these differentiators, and common barriers for learning is something that we discussed, or Adam discussed 2 weeks ago. And not every barrier is what an organization faced, but this is again where I think the 350th really has a head start. There is a deliberate intent behind learning, and it allows you not only to hold yourself accountable, but also the team and each other. So it's a really exciting start for you all. And tying it back to the tactics, want to make sure that there is this variety of learning opportunities regularly. Optimizing for outcomes. Again, Colonel Kozlov talked about this at the fireside chat of making sure that our learning is aligned with the mission and what we're trying to achieve. The last one is experiment with metrics. And I say metrics cautiously because they can be a double-edged sword and you get what you measure. So it is really important to check to see what metrics that you put in place have the intended results. And you can validate them again back to the outcomes of number 2. I think there's a lot of opportunity here as well. And if you think about it, there's already practices in place of making sure that we're investing in things. A lot of the DoD has the physical fitness time, and those are metrics that are tracked. So there's always the way to experiment with the time allowed for learning across the organization is one way to think about metrics here. So what happens next? So we're coming back to those differentiators in the digital organizations. Agility vice agile, over-communicate and deliberate collaboration, and foster a learning ecosystem. What can change is that this is now the differentiators describing the 350th and what this organization is. Fun fact, this is now the 8th time I've showed some version of this slide. So I'm really taking my own advice to heart here to over-communicate the intent and the goal. Wanted to provide a cheat sheet for everyone across these differentiators and make sure that you can see how they holistically work together, but want to really focus in on that last one, that learning ecosystem, because that is one that we can without a doubt do today. And of course, when you think learning, all of you just jump to Benjamin Franklin, but there is a reason he's in here. He's a wonderful example of practice what you preach, and is known now as one of the best orators of all time. This wasn't a skill he had. Actually, how he became one of the best orators was he would pull speeches that he thought were powerful and resonated and try to jumble them all up and reconstruct the argument, and kept doing this and kept trying to make those strong arguments again and again. Right, that's involving you and what you want to learn. So that leads us to the learning opportunities that this organization has available coming through the next couple of months. First on this week, we have the interactive workshop on Thursday morning that we hope that many of you will be able to join. And then there's book clubs, there's the Holiday Learning Club, and then finally the Sagely Immersive Learning Lab. We'll be rolling out more information about this, but this is the 3-week course that I briefly mentioned that's really focused in on how to give you tactics and tools to apply that agility to your role. Wanted to, again, provide all this content to you all. So similar as last week or 2 weeks ago, you can access this link tree to not only see the full list of content referenced in the learning organizations, but today's talk, plus Adam's lecture is there. And if you all would take some time, provide feedback. We are iterating and we want to improve these to be best for you all in the 350th. So please take a short survey and let us know how we're doing. And my last slide is the get off the stage. And if you have any questions for me. And Nick has posted all the links in the chat too, for those that are on Zoom.
How you doing? This is a Major Mobley. I guess when you mentioned distill on one of your slides, can you do you have any tips for distilling information or examples from when you were, during your experiences?
Yes, I think one of the best tactics is to think of it as an executive summary of and to think about it from the perspective of assume they don't have any history. And so when you're trying to update about a topic or kind of progress of providing that very high level, teach me it, I've heard it, what resonated with me, teach me it like I'm 10 and talk through it. So, and then allows the person to come follow up with the questions that they have. But it's that really executive summary, 2 or 3 lines to describe what's going on. And I think it is hard to do, right? I'm going to forget what it was. A president said, if you ask me to write or to give an hour-long talk, I need no prep. If you want me to do it in 15 minutes, I need 4 days. It's that difference of how to distill information is a hard component. So hopefully some of those tactics do help of how to kind of think about it.
Thank you.
Hey, Tori, I'm just out of curiosity, you mentioned a couple of times the idea of taking kind of these agile principles and applying them to things that are not directly related to software as an example. Do you have any kind of examples of what that looks like in practice, whether a time where maybe in your Pentagon role as an example, where somebody was able to apply some sort of agile principle to policy development, or maybe the way that they kind of did their normal day-to-day work? Do you have any kind of examples of what that might look like?
From a policy perspective, I am seeing a lot more opening up there, hopefully. So I think there's a view of what you see in the building and what's happening as it festers out to all the different organizations that impacts. But from a policy perspective, there is a more targeted rollout as far as from an acquisition policy, the software acquisition pathway, which is providing the guiding structure to how to implement software best practices into how you manage a program in the DoD, was originally fielded as an interim policy for a year. And that was intentional because to get a policy to be fully vetted, it is a long process. And so what they did with that was to offer that year period as an interim to allow programs and the services to provide the input that would have normally not been able to get impacted. So I think from a perspective of the agile concept there is how do you provide the opportunity to get that user feedback and understanding like your constraints. So you still have to go through legal, and there's a lot of public affairs for any policy, but there's a way to creatively maybe do something on the front end to ensure you're getting that engagement that like keeps the alignment coming of a policy doesn't completely hurt the programs or the services that it's trying to impact. And then the other one that I talked about briefly is, again, just thinking about what are your big events and how to break those down. So I said the contracting example. Another thing is to work across the team and a cross-functional team and map out one of those events to see kind of all the push points and identify opportunities to maybe where a bottleneck exists or better collaboration and understanding. So there's a lot of tools, and again, we'll talk some of these through with the workshops and other learning events, that it's just kind of switching of how do you apply it that I think are very powerful.
Tori, this is Shannon Conklin. So one of the slides that you had kind of in the middle of the presentation was on the GE example. And you said that once they implemented agile development processes, their software development time actually increased from weeks to months. And I hope I didn't miss something, but the chart at least alluded to the fact that they didn't then speed back up until things such as DevSecOps came online. But were there other things that they did to implement agile practices and then also speed up their software development to improve the way that they did business?
Great question, Shannon. And I'm sorry, there might have been a little bit confusion on the chart. So the chart was trying to show the GE timeline as far as when they were the giant at the top of the topic, the market capitalization, and then when they were removed from the Dow. And then I overlaid the software methodology and kind of evolution of software on top of that. Not to say that they were one for one as far as what was happening in the software world directly impacted GE, but to show that there are those other events that probably are contributing factors to influencing whether they are remaining kind of at that giant stage, and GE kind of just being the one I overlaid the two timelines. The question I think you're asking is in the 1970s and 80s, they were talking about software deployment being 1 to 5 years. The next iteration was they got it down to weeks or months, both on the developing and the IT operator side, but they were still very two separate silos. And so there was a lot that could and did go wrong when developers handed over. It was like the over the fence moment to the IT operators. And that's why it really spurred this idea of DevOps as this combined approach and multidisciplinary team, a term that is very prevalent in the DoD, to ensure that they were minding both the developers and the IT operators' constraints to deploy more successfully and make that a non-event. So I think that's answering your question, hopefully, Shannon. If not, happy to follow up.
No, that answered my question. I apologize for my lack of understanding on that slide, but I guess I would question, and I see another question in the chat here was, did you mean that when agile development was first implemented, that the timelines for development of a tool or piece of software actually did increase?
So this is what it's saying is that when software features were first being developed in the 70s and 80s, it was 1 to 5 years to develop and deploy. And then agile is it being adopted, and that goes from weeks to months, but like there's still a separation of the two. And then it goes down to routine, risk, hours, minutes. So.
Copy. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Well, I just wanted to say thank you all for participating. We hope that you all will continue to join us at the workshop on Thursday, and excited to continue working with you and learning from you as we continue to offer these lectures in this entire digital series.